Okay, so we're going to look at this data access or data source object here. And it's going to have and use the database helper to create the database. It's going to have an open and close method, and then it's going to have what we call the CRUD methods, create, read, update, and delete methods that'll access our database and create our database objects. Remember, we created a planet object here that we can use. So this is our planet object, and this is our data DAO here. And our main program is going to then use this as kind of the presenter controller in the model view controller, or the model view. This will be our data model in model view controller, model view presenter. This whole set of code here in green. Okay, so let's look at this. I called it, just created a new class. It doesn't have to inherit from anything. It's called Planet Table DAO for Data Access Object. So this is going to be how we're going to interface with our database. It's going to need an SQL helper, one of our database helpers here. We're calling that DB helper. And we'll use that to create a database, so it also needs an SQLite database. The constructor here is going to instantiate the database helper. So when the constructor, all it does is set up the helper. It doesn't set up the database yet. We have an open command and a close command. The open command is going to call get writable database using our database helper. Now, get writable database is not defined directly here. We just have on create and on upgrade. But this extends SQLite open helper, and this database provides us that method. So it has this create writable database, and that'll check if the database is out there, and if it's not out there, it'll call the onCreate method here to create the database. Okay, so this gets us our database, our SQL database, and we have that here. So that's our variable up here. Close, again, uses DB helper to close our database connection. So this opens our database connection and closes that for us. And so now we're going to have a set of methods for doing the CRUD stuff. In this video, we'll look at the create method. So again, we're going to have a create method that's going to save a planet to the database. Now we could be doing two things. We could be passing in a planet here, or the information for the planet here. I go back and forth on what's the best way. Here I did parameters. I just did the planet name and the planet gravity because there's just two of them, and thought that would be easier to create the planet that way. We could, like I say, pass in the whole planet here. It's going to create the planet, write it out to the database, and then also return it. So this also returns the planet that we created or saved out to the database. Now to create a planet, we need something called content values. This is kind of a generic placeholder for values in an SQL command. So we say content values, we create a new one. Here we're calling it values. And then we put stuff in there. Each thing we put in there has to be the name of a field and then its value. So a field name and a value pair. So we say value dot put, and then we specify the name of each of the fields here. And here we're using the field names defined here, so title and value using these things. Now, so we're referring to those. Now, these are static strings over here, so we can just say database helper dot database field planet name and field gravity. And then the values, those are being passed in as parameters here. These are two parameters, so we're setting up that. So that really sets up the record we're going to write, the pairs of fields and values that we're going to write to the database. Okay, now we have our database we created up here, and there are different specific SQL commands. Now you can do a database.exec SQL and execute your own insert, write out your own insert command. But again, there are issues with that. You have to be careful with some problems with SQL injection, and especially if people are able to enter the planet name on a form. So instead, we often like to use these specialized versions. So there's a database.insert command that will create an SQL insert command. So you have to provide the table name, and again we're using a constant for that to find in our helper. Now sometimes some people will take these constants and define them in this DAO object rather than a database helper. So you can decide there. But in our example, they're defined in our database helper. So here's the name of that. You then have to. So the next parameter is just null. This is only used if the actual thing the values we're entering are all null. So we don't have to worry about that. We'll just leave that null. And then values is the values we're setting up here. This is the content values, the kind of the fake record we're putting in the database. So we insert that, we get an insert ID back. Now once this is the ID of the record in the database, and once we have that, now we can actually create a planet. Remember, we created this planet object with an ID, name, and gravity, and we have a constructor with those. So we can just say new planet and use the ID that we got back from the database, the planet name, and the planet data gravity was given up here, and create a new planet, and we're going to return that. Because sometimes it's nice when you create this planet to get the actual planet object back and to use it for different things. So that's our create method. Next we'll look at the rest of the CRUD examples.